It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Janet Tomkow-Coetzer. And Janet is with Hahn&Hahn. And we really enjoy working with Hahn&Hahn. We've done a lot of webinars with Janusz and some of his other colleagues. This is the first time we're chatting to Janet, and so we're very excited about that. And so I'm going to now hand over to her, and she's going to take us through her presentation, where she has a number of slides that she's going to be going through in order for us to all get a great understanding of where we are currently with the processed meat legislation. As you can see, Janet is also one of those interesting people that is not just a lawyer, but she also is a scientist. And so she's going to be speaking with both hats on today, and we're looking forward to that. So I'm now going to hand straight over to her. Janet, thank you so much for being with us today, and we're really looking forward to your presentation. Off you go.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to do this. It's nice to be here. And thank you for the intro. Right, so I'll just start. So my presentation today is on updates on processed meat legislation, but I'll also be doing pretty much like a review of all, the applicable legislations, because there's quite a number that one needs to be wary of and know of, and especially ones that are in a draft. So it's pretty much an overview of all the important relevant legislation when it comes to processed meat. So let me see if I can just go to the next slide. There we go. Right, so I'm going to start off with just naming pretty much all the applicable legislations and which departments they fall under. The first one was obviously the Department of Health, where we have the FCD Act, and one needs to also bear in mind that R146 is applicable when it comes to labeling. We've also got R9692 with regards to the micro standards, the hygiene regulations, which I'm sure everybody's aware of, R638, and then the R908 as amended. Underneath the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development, DALRRD, I still refer to it as DAF. I'm still struggling to get used to the new name, but anyway, so former DAF. Under there, you'll have the APS Act, the Agricultural Product Standards Act, and which is also, we've got now recently the R1283. Well, not recently, but this is also one of the big players when it comes to processed meat. The draft processed meat, which deals with compositional requirements, unfortunately, we're still waiting for that to be published. I think that will also have an impact, but I think what is happening is we first wanted to, well, not us, the department first wanted to, publish the processed meat regulations and see obviously what's going to happen, because also that has an impact on the assignees and inspections. We've also got the poultry regs, the Meat Safety Act. Oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. And last but definitely not least, very important, the National Regulator for Compulsory Specifications, the NRCS. Now, underneath, underneath that, we've got standards and compulsory standards. So we've got a VC, which is a compulsory standard 9100. Now, the last update that was provided was the one on 8th of August 2019, and I haven't heard anything yet, so we are still waiting for an update on that. VC 8019, which deals with canned meat. SANS 885, which very importantly, I have had a lot of questions with regards to it, is not being replaced by VC 9100. In fact, when you read the regulations, well, the standards, they actually go hand in hand. So it's important to know that SANS 885 is not being replaced by any VC or any regulations for that matter. And then also SANS 289, which deals with net quantity, that also is something that one needs to bear in mind when packaging and putting your net quantity on labels. So I'm going to, with this overview, I'm actually going to be touching on all the different, legislation. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time, otherwise we'll be here all day for me to go in depth with every single one. So I've picked certain sections that I think are relevant, especially with regards to processed meat, for each standard, each regulation. And so I'll begin with VC 9100, compulsory specification for processed meat products. So the scope It applies to the handling, preparation, processing, packaging, refrigeration, freezing, chilling, labeling, marking and storage of heat-treated and ready-to-eat processed meat products covered in the scope of SANS 885. Processed meat products and includes microbiological and food safety related compositional requirements of these products listed as SANS 885. So you're going to see, and this is what I often see, SANS 885 is incorporated by reference into VC quite a bit, and I'm going to, so they really do go hand in hand. So the standards as referred to in SANS 885, you have whole muscle cured heat treated products, whole muscle uncured heat treated, community cured heat treated products, which is also the different classes, uncured. I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is, the reformed and unspecified classes, as well as any other unspecified ready to eat processed meat products. So the NRCS administers technical regulations, which is applicable to products that are imported, manufactured, sold, and exported. And why VC 9100 is so important is because you have to apply to the NRCS for approval for the factory or processing facility and the processed meat products. And in the updated VC, which is obviously still 2019, we're waiting for the 2020, but there, what I did notice is there's a lot of reference to the COA, especially, and this I'm going to touch on as well, because now what is nice is I'm also going to try show how everything sort of links together. A lot of individuals, I think, are a bit overwhelmed with the fact that there are so many different regulations and standards that you need to be aware of. But hopefully this will show where each one sort of refers to each other and how they all connect. So this COA is important, and I will discuss it a bit more in depth later on. In VC, with imported processed meat products, must originate from a facility approved for exports in the country and approved by DALRRD. In this annexure, again, there's reference, the update to 2019 to the COA, which is important. And then the VC also deals with processed meat products for exports, again, which needs to be approved by DAF and has to be done according to the veterinary procedural notices, the VPNs. Now, VPN 52 is actually still in a draft. I was hoping that we could have, I could have more info on that, but unfortunately, we're still waiting for VPN 52. As I mentioned earlier, SANS 885 and VC 912, in my eyes, go hand in hand. In VC, the VC 9100, it has a sentence there that says, packed processed meat products shall be marked in accordance with the requirements of SANS 885 and trade descriptions for processed and dried meat products, the Consumer Protection Act, regarding categories of goods that are required to have a trade description applied to them. So there again, SANS 885 is incorporated by reference in the VC. In another section as well, it says it shall comply with the requirements of the latest edition of SANS 885, such as the structure of the facility or processing facility and of equipment, the handling, preparing, processing, producing, packaging, marking, labeling, and storage of the product ingredients and composition, the test methods, the hygiene requirements for the factory processing facility and for employees, and the microbiological requirements for the product. So again, we see how the VC incorporates SANS and how they go hand in hand together. I just did a small quick slide with regards to SANS. I'm sure everybody's quite well versed with SANS 885 as it deals with the compositional requirements. And as I mentioned earlier in the slide, if I can go back, the structure of the factory and processing facilities. It also provides guidelines on how to classify processed meat, microbiological requirements, and also labeling. Is dealt with there. The next one that I would like to speak about. So there we've dealt with the VC and the SANS 885. If anybody has any questions, I'm not sure if Linda would like to, if anybody would like me to just go back and revise those, I can. With regards to the next ones that I'd like to discuss is the regulations regarding to the classification, packing, and marking of processed meat products. Now, this was published on the 4th of October 2019 and came into effect in this year. So R1283. Now, this slide is just a very brief summary. It's got to do with compositional. It provides standards for classes. What it does emphasize is the country of origin which is quite interesting. I have it's all the countries of origin of product must be listed. I'll deal with that. I'm going to deal with each of these in more in depth in a moment. Also, when it comes to displaying sliced ready-to-eat meats, and also in this regulation, I've noticed that there's a major focus on durability dating, date marking, batch coding. All of these definitions, new definitions have been provided in the regulations, and the definition of MRM has been added in as well. Let's see, sorry, I think my mouse has gone. Let's see. There we go. So the scope of these regulations, where it applies only to the categories and classes of processed meat products referred to in Regulation 4 and intended for sale in South Africa. So the category classes are whole muscle processed meat products, comminuted processed meat products, reformed processed meat products, coated processed meat products, unspecified processed meat products, and then GI processed meat products. So this provides obviously all the categories, and then the categories are obviously classified further. I didn't put that in, otherwise we're also going to be here for a very long time. So I just thought I'd just give a bit of a summary. The tables that are provided in the regulations also provide specific compositional standards for processed meats products, and also, like I mentioned before, what did change and what was quite interesting was the marking of containers. They put quite a bit of focus on date marking and country of origin. So I thought I would focus on that just so that everybody knows what exactly has changed. So with these regulations, the country of origin, okay, it must be in a letter size of at least 1 millimeters in height, and then provided that in the case where processed meat products originating from 2 or more countries are packed in an outer container, all the countries of origin shall be declared on such an outer container. And that's important to note because that's new. Then with regards to date marking, this was an entire section of regulation that was added in, which says that each container containing a processed meat product shall be clearly marked with the batch code or batch number, or date marking in such a way that the specific batch is easily identifiable and traceable. So they also focus quite a bit on traceability with regards to processed meat products. And this is why date marking has also come in. Provided that in the case of the processed meat products presented for sale in a deli display fridge or counter sliced, cut or whole, the sell-by date shall appear, at least appear on each container. So and then further on it goes, if a date marking appears on container, it shall be preceded by the appropriate wording best before and a use by and sell by, depending on the nature of processed meat products concerned. And then abbreviations are not allowed, except for where best before, BB, can be used. And sorry, I think it's just, let me move to the next slide. There we go. This I thought was quite interesting, that how very specific they wanted the date sequence to be. It shall be the day, month, year. And of course, when it comes to imported products, where there's, because normally from the States you've got a different date sequence, you know, the month shall be indicated in letters, either written out in full or abbreviated, obviously to prevent any confusion. And then the year shall be written out in full, and it should not be removed or altered by a person. Now, I find that very interesting because we have had queries with regards to, you know, what if after certain analysis you can extend, you know, the best before and all that, or the sell-by date. And it's very clear here, it shall not be removed or altered by any person. So, you know, whether it would be acceptable to rather put a sticker next to, you know, the product, or I'm not sure if over it, so that you are not removing it, or, well, I suppose if you cover it, but next to it, that's also something that's up for debate. If processed meat products are packed in an outer container, which will, during normal usage, be discarded by the consumer, the date marking shall, if indicated, appear on each individual container. That will be retained by the consumer until consumption. So those two things are, oh, I think I'm, sorry, this is my first webinar, so I am struggling a bit to keep my mouth awake. Let me just
good, I got it. There we go. Don't stress, I got it.
Okay, thank you, Linda. So the processed meat products, this is also an entire new section well, this whole regulation for processed meat, which specifically deals with meat products presented for sale in a display fridge. So when sliced, cut, or whole processed meat products are displayed for sale in, for example, a deli display fridge or a counter, the appropriate product name shall be indicated conspicuously in the immediate vicinity of each class or subclass of the meat product concerned. So I think it can no longer be, you know, we just have this array of, you know, cuts of sliced processed meat. There have to be, you know, the product name must be visible. Right, so I did mention the Certificate of Acceptability. Now, R638, which was published on the 22nd of June, 2018, the general hygiene requirements for food premises and the transport of food. Now, this is quite an important, what's actually a very important regulation, and it was fast-tracked, especially, you know, well, this is how I'd like to believe with regards to the Listeriosis outbreak. So there are a lot of requirements here. I'm not going to go through the whole of R638, just certain sections which I thought might be relevant to processed meat. So the Certificate of Acceptability is very important. A person may not handle food or permit food to be handled on a food premises in respect of which a valid certificate of acceptability has not been issued or is not in force, and this also applies to an outsourced vehicle used for transport of perishable food on behalf of a person in charge of the food premises. Now, this is very important because a valid certificate of acceptability is now going to impact even with regards to, as you saw earlier with the VC. It's been incorporated as well that there needs to be a COA that is in force, and that's and so anyway, so in carrying on, let me just read. There we go. And in contravention of a restriction, condition, or stipulation contained in the Certificate of Acceptability. Just move my slide.
I got it.
Is it okay?
There we go.
Right, so Regulation 4 of R638 deals with the prohibition on handling and transportation of food. So a person in charge may not handle food or allow food to be handled in a manner contrary to the provisions of these regulations. If an inspector following an inspection of food premises or a facility is of the opinion that the premises or facility or any activity constitutes a health hazard, and that the continued use of the food premises or facility or activity must be prohibited because of the following, such as of the condition of the food premises or facility, the manner in which the food premises are used, the food premises or facility do or do not comply with the regulations, the manner in which particular activity takes place with regards to the handling of food, or the circumstances that exist with regard to the food premises or facility, or any other activity, a local authority may summarily prohibit the use of the food premises, and a prohibition notice may be handed to the person in charge, and if he is not available, or their representative. So this is quite important because then it stops use. It's obviously going to stop production, stop all that. So R638 does, you know, the inspectors do have quite a bit of weight when it comes to inspecting in terms of R638, the EHPs. All right, let me click.
I got it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Linda. Sorry, I don't know. I think my mouse doesn't go to sleep.
All good. I got it.
Right. So, and then I focused on Regulation 12 with regards to standards and requirements for handling and transportation of meat and meat products. Now, in terms of Regulation 12, subject to the Meat Safety Act. So this is also where they all link to each other because they refer to each other. So R638 from the Department of Health also refers to the Meat Safety Act. So an animal may only be killed, bled, eviscerated, skinned, or dressed on food premises in a room used specifically and exclusively for that purpose, and in accordance with good manufacturing process if no further handling or processing of the carcass takes place in that room, and the carcass and products derived from the carcass do not come into direct contact with other meat. So that's also important for food enterprises to take note of. Okay. Furthermore, they speak about the transport of meat products, and this is a very important section, especially with regards to the outbreak that we had. this is quite an important section. So a person may only transport meat and meat products in a suitable vehicle which is provided for the exclusive use of the transportation and delivery of meat or meat products. So you can't, I suppose in the past, you know, have someone, because I know that you sort of outsource the transportation or delivery of meat. And you can't have one side of you know, the truck having meat or and the other side vegetables. It's got to be exclusive use of the transportation and delivery of meat, not any other goods. It must be kept clean and not contaminated by, for example, flies or dust or any of that, which then obviously, when we talk about being clean, 12(4)(b, quite important. The compartment of a vehicle used for the transportation of meat and meat products from an abattoir to a food premises to be processed further or to be sold to the public must be lined with a suitable impervious jointless material, which must be capable of being cleaned and, when necessary, disinfected easily. The reason that's also highlighted is because I've even seen, you know, not all transportation vehicles and delivery vehicles have a suitable impervious jointless material. Sometimes they'll have joints that are obviously slot together, and then you'll have holes, which obviously products can accumulate, and which obviously then leads to more risk. Despite sub-regulation 4, the best available method must apply when a single-use vehicle is not available, or if obviously it is impractical to use a single-use vehicle to transport small quantities of meat and meat products. But I still think that even if you have something, use a single-use transport or small quantities, you must make sure that the container that you are traveling with or delivering the products must be lined with a suitable impervious jointless material, and which must be easily disinfected if necessary. Just go.
You there?
All right, Winnie.
Can I help you, Janet?
Yes, sorry everyone. I know it's a little bit frustrating, but
that's all good.
Okay, right. So now we've dealt with, so far we've dealt with the VC 9100 as well as SANS 885, which are both applicable. Then you have the regulations which relate to processed meat products. The next regulations which I'd like to touch on is with regards to the Hasip systems, which will be R908. I'm only going to touch on this, but it is applicable, so it is important that we deal with this and that we don't forget about these regulations. So R908 are the regulations relating to the hazard analysis and critical control point system, the Hasip system. So Regulation 2 of R908 states the following. No owner of a food handling enterprise, as specified in column 2 of Annexure A, is allowed to handle food without a Hasip system fully implemented to the satisfaction of the relevant authorized health authority in relation to the foodstuffs under consideration, or on or after the date specified in column 3 of Annexure B, as applicable to such a food handling enterprise, and a valid certificate referred to in Regulation 14. Now, I just went and did a screenshot of, obviously, Annexure A, because the first one dealt with meat and edible meat offal, preparations and products. So they are seen as food handling enterprises, such as wholesalers, processors, transporters, retailers, and butcheries, even including those in supermarket premises. So all these food handling enterprises will need to, obviously, they do fall under R908. Right, so I have been asked a number of times, if you've already got a food safety management system in place, you know, is the Hasip system still required? So in R908, Regulation 9 states the owner of a food handling enterprise may apply a system equivalent to one referred to in Regulation 8 if such equivalent system includes at least the principles and process of the Hasip system in question. So Regulation 8 of R908 states the following. The owner of a food handling enterprise, when implementing a Hasip system, must ensure that the system is in accordance with the principles as provided for by the Joint Food and Agriculture Organization, the WHO, Food Standards Program Codex Alimentarius Commission's General Requirements, which is entitled Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, the Hasip System, and Guidelines for Application. The reason I'm touching on this is because the Hasip system takes quite a while to obviously to implement. It's incredibly costly. You know, there's also structural changes that may need to occur to, you know, to processing, you know, plants. So in order to have this Hasip system, it's actually quite a bit in place. If you already have, I think I've missed a, oh, no, I haven't. All right, sorry. So I did read by Dr. Lucia Annelich. She had released a communication last year in which she discussed, you know, the Hasip requirements, and because there was a bit of confusion. If you've already got, you know, a food safety management system in place, do you still need to do the Hasip? And in her communication, she did inform, you know, everybody that she wasn't had discussions with the Directorate of Food Control, and after looking at regulation and regulation 9 in her communication, what we can glean from that is that another food safety management system may be in place, provided that it is based on the 7 principles of Hasip. So I don't know if that answers a lot of the questions, but and then obviously the requirement for a certification by a SANIS accredited certificate body remains. I don't know if that's obviously changed, but I think Dr. Annelich would also would be able to answer those questions, as I know she's been chatting with the Director of Food Control. I then would like to just touch on the Agency for Food Safety and Quality, and the reason I'd like to speak about this is because this is also quite current. Now, AFSQ has been assigned by the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development as an assignee, you know, to conduct inspections of processed meat products. And this comprises the classification, the compositional analysis, requirements for containers and outer containers, marking of containers and outer containers, and traceability. On the 17th of April, the AFSQ released inspection fees, or proposed inspection fees, for comments. And I believe they also had a webinar last week, and unfortunately they didn't have great sound, but they did send the presentation around, which was very kind of them. And unfortunately, a lot of questions that I do have with regards to inspection fees, I'm still waiting for them, but I do want to touch on this because this is quite important, obviously, because it deals with the inspection of processed meat products and the costs involved and what exactly is done. Now, I have been asked questions with regards to the frequency of testing. From what I understand, each product to be inspected once per annum for the first year. I'm not sure if this means if you've got 10 different varieties of each product, will each product have to be inspected per annum for the first year? Results of inspections. Now that obviously will, if the results of inspections are poor, then the frequency of inspections will increase. DNA testing is also something that will be done during the first year. There'll be 50 random tests done. And that proposed inspection and lab costs, I can actually, for those that have not received it, I can send it through to anybody who would like a copy of those proposed costs. With regards to non-compliance, a direction is issued by the Agency for Food Safety Inspector, which will provide corrective actions and it will be submitted to the DAF. I'm just going to say DAF because I really struggled to say the new name. And complaints or appeals with regards to inspections can be done. But from what I understand, it is possible for the assignee to recommend to DAF for seize and control of the products, which I'm not so sure how that will work. And again, if anybody has questions with regards to that, please let me know, and then I will also follow up on that, because it is one of the things that I'd like to, you know, have clarity on, and it is something we all need to be aware of. I'd also like to just touch on legal liability. So we've gone through the regulations and the standards that are relevant. We've got VC 910, we've got the SANS 885. We've also got the processed meat regulations R1283, and as well as the hygiene regulations R638 that is applicable, and R908 that I've touched on. Now, what I'd like to speak about, oh, and also AFSQ, which are the inspection costs relating. So these are all the things that you need to be aware of when it comes to processed meat products. Now, what happens if you don't comply? I'm only going to touch on this very quickly, but there are legal liabilities. So there's criminal liability in terms of the FCD Act. So there's quite a bit of weight on that. It's not just a fine, you can be criminally liable. In terms of the Agricultural Product Standards Act, you fall under the processed meat 1283, which is also quite interesting. Then we've got common law and criminal procedure act. If obviously there is loss of life, or if someone is hurt due to or they suffer. And the example I can use is obviously the Listeria outbreak. We've also got the Constitution, that you would be liable underneath the Constitution with regards to a right to life. The reason I put this slide in deals with criminal liability of the person in charge of the premises. Now, the COA keeps popping up. Now, the COA has the name and ID number of a person in charge of the premises. And I don't know if everybody that has their name on the COA knows that they are criminally liable in terms of the FCD Act, should they not be compliant and should something happen. The person in charge of the premises where unsound, unwholesome, or contaminated foodstuffs were sold can be prosecuted under the FCD Act and be sentenced to a fine or equivalent imprisonment between 6 and 24 months, depending on whether or not it is a first offense or not. So everyone that is a person in charge of, a premises, I hope that they must understand that their name and ID number, it's not just a certificate of acceptability, it's a very important document that I'm not sure everyone understands, the weight behind it. And as you can see, the certificate of acceptability has been incorporated into the VC. We discuss it also here. It does pop up everywhere, so it is quite important to know what you need to know about the certificate of acceptability. Other liabilities we've also got in terms of the Constitution. You can even, there's a case with regards to damages of about 1 million per victim that was awarded. You have directed liabilities, liability in terms of the NRCS, the VC, the SANS, and as well as the Health Act. So it's quite a bit of liability and weight that's behind all these regulations. I did mention to Linda that I speak very quickly. And I think I stuck to my word because I even took slides out because I thought this might be too long, but unfortunately I do speak very quickly. Does anybody have any questions with regards to, my presentation, because we do have quite a bit of time. Yes, thank you very much, Linda. Would you like me to go through anything, Linda? Linda, do you have any questions?
We do have a number of questions, Janet, so thanks very much for the presentation. I think there's obviously some frustration within the market because some of these things are still in draft and there hasn't been any further development. We're sitting almost in a completely draft world. The only thing that's no longer draft, I think is sort of, VC 9100, but we've obviously got some issues in relation to the SANS document, which is in draft. So I think that's, that everything feels like it's in draft at the moment. Yeah. There are a couple of specific points. When we look at labeling, just to be clear, so you have labeling in the VC, but within the VC 9100, it refers to the labeling requirements as defined within SANS 885. Correct, yeah. Okay, so in terms of, although you've listed it under the VC, I think what's important is that there is a heading which refers to labeling and obviously the compositional requirements, but that's dealt with more fully in Regulation 1283. However, there is a specific requirement that I can see under the VC, and that being Regulation 5.2, where it just refers to the name of the organization in terms of how it must be put onto the packaging. And I think that would be, the only specific requirement. Regulation 5.2, in terms of labeling, you would have to consider Regulation 5.2 in addition to the requirements that are within Regulation 1283. Obviously, both of them refer to 885, but I think as a principle always within law is to make sure you do read and then read it again. Yes, and also don't forget, R146, when it comes to labeling, it's not just, the VC or, the processed meat regulations or SANS. It's also, you need to bear in mind the labeling, regulations under the FCD Act. Yes, yeah, and the VC does mention that specifically with regards to, you know, the labeling requirements. Okay, just your opinion on something. We have this very interesting requirement of now having to show on sliced meats within a deli environment a number of legal aspects. So, you know, I think the first question is, how on earth are we going to do this? And second question is, how on earth are they going to enforce this? So your opinion on this?
With regards to enforcement, I suppose when an inspector does go and have a look, you know, they will obviously want, look, it's a bit of an interesting, I'm actually going to go right through to that regulation. I don't know if you can see on my screen, or do you only see the presentation?
I see the presentation, but I'm happy to share your screen. So
no, I'll actually. So when they speak about, so it's Regulation 13, are displayed for sale, daily display fridge or counter. The appropriate product name shall be indicated conspicuously in the immediate vicinity of each class or subclass. So I think you're going to have, you know, those little plaques that you obviously put up. With regards to enforcement, that's a very good question. Enforcement, in terms of an inspector coming, I suppose they would issue, you know, a warning. I'm not actually sure. I'm not actually sure how an inspector would enforce this, and you know, what would be the consequences if not every single product, for example, because the daily, you know, a daily display fridge, for example, there's quite a bit of turnaround there. You know, you'll quickly cut through one, then bring another one, and perhaps someone would place that, you know, processed meat or the salami, just for example, in a different area. You know, if there's a lot of, so it is something that's, it's a little bit tricky, because not unless you have completely allocated and everybody, you know, that's working there does know where to put the meat, and how an inspector is going to enforce it, that's a good question. I'm not actually sure.
Look, I think at the end of the day, the consumer needs to know what they're buying, and you know, I think you could look at something and you could say, well, is this a sandwich loaf, or is it in fact ham? And you know, I think there is an opportunity there for a little bit of misrepresentation. And you know, I think at the end of the day, the consumer wants to know that they're getting what they paid for, and sometimes it really does take an expert to be able to tell visually which class of product am I looking at.
Yes, you know, so with the class or subclass, it's very interesting that's one of the requirements. It's a bit strange, I'll be honest, and I'm you know, with regards to enforcement, I don't know. We haven't come across a situation yet.
No, I think we're going to have to wait for it to be tested within the enforcement environment. Yeah. I think, you know, but it does sound quite, you know, it does sound challenging at the end of the day. But I suppose if you think of a restaurant buffet, for example, they would, practically speaking, they would label the dishes that they're presenting. They would have a similar requirement to make sure that they identify allergens. So I think your lollipop idea is probably the best way of doing it. But like you said, depending on how many products are displayed, where those products are displayed, it would definitely take a different level of management of stock rotation within the deli.
Yeah, I mean, display. I've even experienced it, but it's correct. I've even experienced it myself, where, you know, for example, the salami, I keep using salami because, you know, it's cut and then it's put in a different place where originally was picked up, and there isn't any labeling on it. There isn't anything like that. So you have to ask, you know, which is this, what is this? So yes. I suppose they do need more clarity, but it is going to require to be more vigilant on, you know, obviously the retailer that's displaying the products.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember is the reason for the Agricultural Products Standards Act. The regulations that fall under this legislation, as I understand it, Janet, are really to protect us as consumers, to ensure that we are paying for the correct grade the correct price for the correct grade of product. And so it's to define the composition, it's to define what do we call certain things, so that at the end of the day, the consumer knows that they're getting what they paid for. So yes. I would think it's very much along those lines. Another interesting one, and I have to say, I've been quite surprised at the number of people that have asked this question and also where the questions have originated from. I think the question relates to Regulation 638, and that being the transport of food. So yes. We have this practice within industry where often a retailer will return products, and you then have I'm there to deliver the next batch of good product, but I first have to uplift returns. So we obviously have to distinguish between the types of returns, because you could have quality returns, and Louise suggests in this case that quality returns could be, you know, it's incorrect barcoding or something along those lines. In other words, it is not contaminated product. But it
could be something in the packaging or something like that.
There we go. So it's a quality defect, it's not a food safety defect. Her question relates to, can I use the same truck that I'm using a truck to deliver good product, the next batch, can I use that truck to uplift batches where there are quality defects?
But would it be quality defects, for example, of only meat products?
I think in this case it would be. It would be safe to assume that, because you've got a distributor of meat products using that vehicle, and they're now coming to deliver those products and now have been asked to uplift certain products. So I think the important thing is, if we assume that it's the same type of product, let's make that assumption for the purposes of the first answer. But what we have is a quality defect. Can I uplift the product if it's only quality related? And
I believe you can. Especially when looking at Regulation 12.4, because it says may only transport meat in a suitable vehicle if it's the exclusive use of transportation and delivery of meat or meat products. So it would then fall under the transportation, and you would be delivering these meat products, obviously, like you say, it's not the quality, it's just the packaging that needs to be delivered. You know, I don't see why it's not, as long as it's kept clean. If obviously the delivery, the person that's driving the delivery, once they've taken out and they've all the products that they were there to deliver, and if they see that there's, for example, a bit of dirt left over, or even a little bit of, you know what I mean, blood or anything like that, I think what I would recommend is to make sure that it's clean before placing in the remaining products that you want to then transport and deliver back. Okay. And that's why I'm asking. Yeah, so I think it would just be, you can, because it's for the exclusive transport of meat. It's not anything else. And if you want sure that the it's a suitable, for example, jointless material, which is capable of being cleaned, the compartment is being cleaned, I don't see why you can't do the transportation of meat, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. Even but
no, absolutely. And I think this is very much the argument. It's do I really have to send a whole new truck just to pick up some stuff when it's the same stuff, but it just happens to be, damaged, or the packaging or the printing is incorrect. But I think there's another argument, and the argument now relates to whether the product is no longer safe. So if you've got product which is now expired on the shelf, the packaging has been damaged to the point that the product is exposed. In other words, it could be a potential risk should that product be transported in the same truck that is transporting food, which is in fact sound and wholesome, whereas this contaminated product now is potentially unsound or unwholesome.
You see, that's also a bit of a tricky one, because if you cannot guarantee that after dropping off the safe products, if we call it that, and then you obviously deliver and you load the truck with the products that are expired and it's not safe, and then they're taken back to, they're delivered back. you can't be
Yes.
sure that truck is going to be, or that vehicle is going to be cleaned and disinfected. I suppose that would have to be more systems in place. I would be a bit wary there, but again, if I think the correct disinfection procedures are followed to ensure that that there's no little joints or no little bits that obviously the unsafe product can be there, and it's properly disinfected and cleaned. I suppose I'd be a bit wary. I would be a bit wary of that. But again, that's also looking at the cost perspective. That's something that I think companies and retailers will have to. If you can see a product is dangerous or potentially could cause danger, I may use a separate vehicle.
Yes, yeah,
because
and I think
that vehicle will be properly disinfected. It's how sure are you that the guy is going to clean it as well as he should?
absolutely, and I think I have to bear in mind that we're now in the retail setting, so I'm offloading at the retailer. I may not even be able to clean that vehicle. So I think that's where am I able to do those things in order to ensure that the vehicle itself will not be contaminated?
Yes,
so I think it's interesting, but it is definitely something that people struggle with on a daily basis because of, as you correctly say, the the cost. Okay, we have a question with regards to legislation relating to antibiotic residues, whether there is legislation. I think the answer is most definitely yes in that respect, but it would yes.
There is, but I don't actually have it here, so I'd have to have a look. I don't have that on hand here, but there is.
We can put out. Yeah, we can put out a list. I think in terms of that, it would fall under both sides. You've got the agricultural side, plus you've obviously got the health side in relation to what is permissible in the final product. Am I correct?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. There's also if you have a look at Regulation 908, okay, so we've got a number of issues in relation to Regulation 908 with respect to alternative food safety management systems. Okay, so a couple of people asking in this respect as to what is an alternative food safety management system. And I think we have had clarification from the Directorate in this respect, and I think your interpretation about it must cover the requirements of Hasip is quite clear. But I think what is important to highlight is the fact that it has to be a SANAS accredited certification body.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely.
Right, so that's created a lot of challenges for some companies where they've had, for example, FSSC 22000 in place, but they have had to, look for a certification body that can audit them against the Hasip requirements. We're still being faced, I think, practically on a day-to-day basis with the requirement for a Hasip system in addition to the food safety management.
It is quite difficult, and I think a lot of suppliers are even at the initial stages with Hasip implementation, but they have an FSA audit in place, and then others are awaiting the FSA audits or the Hasip audits to take place, and it's a very difficult position at the moment, but there is no way around it. The requirement for certification by SANAS accredited certification body remains. And even, in that communication that Dr. Lucia Annelich did, send out, it's even stated there, it has to, there is no way around it. That requirement stands. And, a lot of suppliers are already certified, on other GFSI, recognized food safety management systems. I think, like you mentioned, the FSST 2200, 000, and they've been working with certification bodies accredited by SANAS, but it's taking its time. I mean, you've also got, some suppliers have to do structural changes.
Absolutely, and I think, look, in terms of the requirements of Hasip, I think it is most definitely possible to integrate your food safety management systems. By ensuring that you're covering a number of requirements. In addition to, you don't want to have three procedures. You don't want to have three procedures about the same thing. You want to be able to use an integrated approach I think the challenge is just coming around the cost of the specific certificate with regards to with regards to SANS. Yes,
correct.
yeah. So
it requires
so you have yes, in fact, I think if you have it's just quite interesting to understand the pyramid of food safety management systems. And I think if you look at the pyramid of systems, you have 10330, SANS 10330, which is the current Hasip system, which is what really is required by Regulation 908. And that's actually is probably less onerous than FSSC 22000. And so that's important to note. The requirements of FSSC 22000 are far more onerous than SANS 10330. But at the end of the day, there are, I think it's like law, the devil is in the detail. You've got specific aspects that have to be done in a particular way within the different standards, and you can't just assume because you have ISO 22000 that will automatically cover the requirements of
yes,
SANS.
Yes, I think that's it's a problem that a lot of suppliers have. They say, but is this not sufficient? But in terms of R908, it isn't. If it doesn't have the Hasip, the principles of Hasip in it, it's unfortunately,
yeah, it is definitely a tricky one, and I think at the end of the day, the law is the law, and we appreciate why you would have to have that. Right, in terms of the final question with regards to the distribution of meat. So within the Regulation 638, you have that paragraph that says there is I can have a mixed load. In other words, if we go back to that regulation, we've obviously got the requirement to use the vehicle for meat only. That's the first thing. However, 12.5 says that despite sub-regulation 12.4, the best available method, if a single vehicle is, if it's not practical. So if you have in this case, you've got a deli, or rather a restaurant supplier. So they would, in many cases, have.
It's a small amount, yeah.
Yes. So if it's a small amount, what is the requirement, or rather, what do we call the best available method in that respect? Is there anything that we could use as an example in this case?
Chuck, I think even if they follow, if it's for a restaurant, the container, I think what's very important is obviously if it's, if a single vehicle is not available, okay, and you're transporting a small quantity, I think the container in which you're transporting the meat products must still comply with, R638, in the sense that even if it's a small box, let's just say it's a small box, it has to be for the exclusive use of transportation of meat, that one box. So you can't, for example, put, mix the meats and all sorts of stuff that's going into the restaurant. It must be kept clean. And even more so, I would be very vigilant in the terms of the compartment or the container that is being transporting the meat, which must be capable of being cleaned. It doesn't have any joints, where things can collect. It can be easily disinfected. So I think even though it's on a much smaller scale, the law still applies. When they say the best method available, I suppose it would depend on the container. I think everybody needs to focus on the container of how you're transporting it, especially when you say small quantities. Even if it's I know they say despite Regulation 4, I don't think were they meaning, you can no longer have a clean or you can just throw it into any, sort of container. That container still needs to comply with the hygiene requirements for the transport of food.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the important thing. You've got to make sure that whatever we're doing is preventing any possible cross-contamination, whether it be coming back as a result of returns or whether it's because we have a mixed load. The principle, I think, of the legislation is to ensure that there isn't cross-contamination.
Yes, I think that's what, is very important to focus on. It doesn't say, in 12.5, despite Regulation 4, you can ignore the other things. It's not that. It's just, I think they understand that it's not always, you know, also cost effective to use a really big vehicle for a small quantity of meat.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you, Janet. We've come to the end of our list of questions. Great to have some interaction from the audience. Thank you so much.
Yes,
again, from our perspective, we really appreciate you making yourself available to us today to help with this webinar. Everybody, we will definitely make the presentation available to you. The recording will also be available. And I think what's important is if you have any further specific questions that you would like to pose to Janet, please feel free to contact her. Here are her contact details, so please reach out to her with your specific issues. And at the end of the day, thank you so much for joining us on this webinar Wednesday, and we look forward to having coffee with you next week, same time and same place. Thanks a lot, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.